interactive session. Before I do that, I just want to introduce myself. I'm your host, Gunjan Syal. I am Transformation Executive at Emerald Technology Grouping. Transform This, which is a think tank for transformations, basically focused on bringing you the knowledge from the industry, bringing you the data that we're seeing in the market, along with guest speakers like Tom, who have that practical experience and bring it all together for us, right? To discuss some really interesting problems we have in the society today and how we can find practical solutions towards that. So as you know, today we're focusing on innovation in education, and I'm so honored to have Tom, professor of data analysis from George Brown, with us today. Tom, would you please like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Gunjan. Okay, so nice to see all of you. Thank you for showing up today. So my name is Tom. You guys can just call me Tom Supra. I've been teaching at George Brown College in downtown Toronto for approximately 21 years at this point. I've been a teacher of various things, first aid and all that kind of stuff since I was about 16 years old. So this is aging me, I think. Um, but certainly I've been teaching at all levels, so diploma level to degrees, including and also including postgraduates. And actually, right now, I built and I'm running two programs in the postgraduate area. One of them is an entrepreneurial management program. I didn't build that. Of course, it's a team of people that are doing it. But I've been placed in charge of the entrepreneurial management program, postgrad program at George Brown College this past year. So I've been building out my own speaker series there for that. And also, I actually did build with a team a business decision making utilizing analytics program at George, also a postgrad program. We aim to actually take liberal arts people and turn them into lean, mean data analysts as well. So, I'm in sort of the data realm and that type of thing as well. But most of the things that I do is sort of coordinate teachers, bring faculty together. We deal with things like curriculum issues and everything like that.
Mhm.
So, I've been through this firestorm of the COVID thing. I was there well before. I was through the entire .com era, teaching at that time as well. So I've seen tragedy and things strike us also. Let's have a really good discussion today on the topic at hand.
Yeah, and
Thank
I
you.
just want to add to that, Tom, that you and I have also talked about the work you do in entrepreneurial space, right?
Oh, yeah. So I actually run the student club called Enactus. I don't know if those of you that are with us have heard about it or know about it or anything, but Enactus is a social enterprise club. And so what we have is teams of students, they're all volunteers, and they generate projects that are sort of in the social enterprise space and community assistance. So, for instance, they're trying to take, plastic spoons and turn them into organic type spoons. They do entrepreneurial training. There's a project team that's working on mental health concerns on campus and things of that nature as well. So whatever the projects are that they want to come up with, we guide those teams, we guide those students to really helping out their communities and things like that too. So it's quite
Absolutely.
amazing. I get a chance to see these young people in action, and we can actually see their educational journey being put into action as well to really go out there and try to do some healthy good things for the world.
Absolutely. And that's a sort of a really good segue into the topic for today, right, Tom? But before I dive into it, I just want to point out for everybody that this session is being recorded. And also, we highly encourage that you be a participant in this setting, right? Feel free to unmute yourself, ask questions. If you don't feel comfortable speaking, feel free to use chat feature. This is a very, very interactive session. Almost think of this as a workshop, right? We're not here to just lecture you. We're here to have a conversation with you.
Yeah, I'll do my best to actually keep up in the chat and everything like that. And I do run classes utilizing this technology and everything. So sometimes I have 80 people in a Zoom room or something like this as well. And so it's always better when you guys can jump in and write some answers, questions, and things like that in the
Absolutely.
chat too. So please do engage with us. Grab the mic if you need to. It'll just be a better conversation that way.
Yeah. So speaking of which, just to set the stage for the conversation, we thought that as an overview, we'll cover three topics with you today. The first one being, what are the challenges that are being faced by stakeholders in the education industry? And I know, Tom, you and I've had this conversation sort of offline. Who actually are those stakeholders? Because if you just try to generalize everything in an industry, it doesn't really work so well. So we
Well,
need
so
to,
I think number one, the biggest stakeholder is probably the students,
right,
right? So they're, what's going on for students out there, and what are their needs, and also how are we being relevant, and where's our value add for the student as
right,
well, especially in the time of COVID and then post COVID too. I think the other stakeholders are pretty much the administrators of the school, and all varying levels of management. We have senior management and then lower levels of management in certain divisions. So the administrators for sure are a huge stakeholder. The support staff that we have as well, the people that assist those students in their various functions like registration and other paperwork oriented things as well. They have a huge stake in the changes and transformations that are happening. And also, my primary focus is of course faculty, because that's where, and teachers, that's really
right.
where I have my focus. Those are my teams, and those are the people that I've seen go through a firestorm with this COVID thing, and I've watched. We have some thoughts and ideas onto what things are going to look like as we're coming out on the other side.
Absolutely. And we're going to dive into some of that later in the slides as well. Tom's helped us prepare some really good material for you guys. So
And
we'll
if I
go into
missed any
that.
stakeholders, please drop them into the chat. Okay, so
Yeah.
let us know if I've skipped over any stakeholders that I didn't think about. Maybe you're doing something in academia, and I
Yeah.
just didn't cover that as well. So,
Yeah, because the way that I look at it, Tom, and again, I'm just going to read the questions first and then we're going to dive into it. But there are some other stakeholders like content creators, right? So there's a delivery side of the education, then there is the receiving side, which is the students. But then there's everybody in the middle who are, even platforms and technologies these days. We're using Zoom for this one,
yeah,
right? I've seen Teams sessions. I think that's where some of the investment has gone in from the colleges. So Dario
Dario agrees
agrees.
with us. Dario agrees with us that the
Yeah,
students are pretty much our main
main
stakeholders.
stakeholders. They're the
Absolutely.
customer, right? From that point of view.
I kind of look at them as clients as opposed to customers, because the
Yeah,
customer is always right. Right?
that's very true. Actually, that's true. So it changes your mindset.
A little
Um,
bit, and it also changes with respect to whether we're talking about, private school versus public school, or, whether we're talking about Canada or another country, and the way that their education system is set up could be different as well. So yeah.
yeah, and
And
Leo just said parents as well for elementary school, absolutely for younger students.
parents certainly have a role to play here, and it's almost as if parents are becoming the other stakeholders, right? So they're becoming the teacher, they're becoming the administrator,
Right.
they're becoming those people, just as teachers roles are also transforming.
Absolutely. So that's actually a really good point, which we didn't put on this slide, but the movement of roles between stakeholders, as you said. So
Absolutely.
then we will also dive into how to transform education while supporting these stakeholders and, as we just discussed, in their new roles. And a lot of that has to do with COVID, as we all know. That's, this joke that I saw in the early days on LinkedIn, who's driving digital transformation these days? And it was a multiple choice questions, right? Is it the CEO? Is it the politicians, or is it COVID? And the answer was COVID, right? So
Yeah.
it's one of those things with the changes that COVID's bringing in.
Although I do
That's
want to ride on top of that, Gunjan, and say that, really at the end of the day, a lot of the transformations that are occurring had started prior to COVID. So
yes,
we in education do know that we need to transform. And so for a long time now, we've seen these sort of slow trickles of some of these transformations, like shifting some of these programs and courses and things like that online, having flexible options and things for students. So we started to go in that direction before
right.
COVID. I think COVID has really just sort of really fleshed that out a little bit more, and we've started to see a lot more, sort of a rapid transformation. Things are moving a little bit
Absolutely.
faster, I think.
And speaking of which, I think, Tom, you'd helped put together a really interesting question for us. So let's dive into that for a second, and then I'm going to go back to the previous slide. So during COVID, I think most of you are familiar with George Brown, right? So as Tom explained, it's an institution within Canada that delivers degree, secondary, post-secondary education to students, right, Tom? Is that
Yeah,
how you would describe George Brown
yeah,
College?
pretty much. Yeah.
Um, so How many students do you think George Brown has lost due
Yeah,
to the
so put your
pandemic?
answer in the chat. Let's see what you think, the 1, 2, 3, or 4. Which one do you think it is? How many students do you think we lost over the COVID time period? And at the meantime, Dario, absolutely, COVID accelerated the transformation process. Dario's going with 20%. Okay, hold on. That's not an answer there, Dario. We got a
That's
39%.
right. You came up with your own answer, which I love, though.
Exactly. Dalal says number one, the 39%. Keela, I think you're also saying
Number
uh,
one.
39%. Dario thinks it's more like 20. Anyone else have any answers? It's
Yeah,
okay to guess.
Metin says two, which is 29%.
Okay, Matin says two. Interesting. I'm surprised that you guys didn't go to the higher end, thinking that we lost all of our students and they all just
No.
decided not to come and continue. The truth of the matter is the answer is two. It's roughly about 29%. But George Brown College, I want you guys to know, is a school that actually covers the gamut. Like we actually
Right.
teach things like business, including all the subsets of business like accounting and HR and all that type of thing. But we also teach things like plumbing, other
Mhm.
trades like electrician and all that kind of stuff as well. So you can imagine that the 29% is probably more impacted by construction technologies, plumbing and those types of things where we actually have to have labs. Over the
Right.
summertime, we actually did try to run some labs for those people, and we were doing it in the physically distanced space and things of that nature as well. And in fact, we got through the summer without any COVID cases. Um, but 1/3 sounds like a lot. Exactly, Dario. It's true. But we actually got through the summer okay without some COVID cases. As of late, we've had a few COVID cases in our residence and on certain campuses and things like that. But the lab thing happened to work throughout the summer. And
Mhm.
I particularly work in the Center for Business School of Management. So it's one particular school in the Center for Business. And I'll tell you that our student subscriptions are down slightly. There's a few percent lowered engagement or whatnot. But I believe our financial commitment is actually oversubscribed. So we made a little bit more money, interestingly enough, even though our student numbers are just slightly down. And I'm talking about, out of 2,500 people, I'm talking we're down like 150 or something. It's really not an enormous
Right.
number as you may expect.
So
So
my assumption there would be, Tom, as you said, there's a lot more movement across programs. So one program may be losing money, but the other one's catching more interest. And I
yeah,
see Andy's joined us. Andy's also a professor at George Brown, and we were having this
hey, Andy.
conversation yesterday, how data is actually picking up steam. And as you said, Tom, that transformation, the need for data driving decisions in the companies and everywhere else had begun even before COVID. But
Well,
how
and
many dashboards did we see come out before
And
COVID?
even before that, they had to do the analysis to figure out
Right.
which programs we would actually be able to run and which programs we should be suspending prior to COVID. So I think
Right.
that in the Center for Business in particular, we ended up suspending over 60 programs.
Hmm.
And it was just a matter of the logistics of being able to deliver all the components and everything like that online in a virtual space so rapidly, and transforming ourselves as faculty and
Right.
teachers and admin, et cetera, so quickly. It was just a really tricky thing to be able to do.
Yeah, and I think that's speaking to the earlier conversation we were having, the changing needs of the stakeholders and changing roles, right? So this is where students' interests are dictating how you transform your business as a college. What services and products are you going to offer to them? So one other thing that we found, if you looked at online, the data that's available on an international scale, and Tom, you and I were talking about this before the session as well. What type of student is actually impacted by COVID, right? From a geographical standpoint, from an international standpoint, and Canada saw a lot of this, right? I've seen this in my MBA school as well, where I think almost 40% of the population used to be international students, given that we are in Canada.
Mhm.
And that's the student population. They're still there and they're studying online, but they're not super happy about not being in a new country, which was the new experience for them. So what are your thoughts on how this chart compares to what you're seeing in George Brown?
So I can tell you anecdotally that with our analytics for business decision making program, the postgrad program, we have a certain number of international student seats and a certain number of domestic student seats that we permit. And this I think it might be a 50-50 split at this point. I'm not sure. That's increased over the years. More international seats have been added to all programs over time.
Hmm.
This must be a financial consideration. But I can tell you that last year, year over year, we were growing exponentially. And last year, the international seats sold out in 2 days. So it was almost a year early, and it was in 2 days, very, very quickly. This year, we also had oversubscription to our program, so much so that we opened up a second cohort,
Hmm.
surprisingly, even during this COVID time in the fall, we ended up having two classes as opposed to just one.
Wow.
And, so we had an overflow of students into that, and we ended up opening up a second cohort for that. And that was really fascinating because we actually anticipated that we would have less interest. However, the international students were making their decision a lot later. So I'm finding the same thing is happening for the January cohort term. What I'm seeing is international students are really starting to ramp up now and asking me the questions about joining our program now. Whereas before I would have said that these things would fill in really quickly.
Hmm. And
Yeah.
Tom, Dario just asked a really interesting question, and it's ironic that you and I were kind of touching upon this just before the session, and Andy and I talked about it yesterday. Dario is saying, what's your take on initiatives such as Google that offers courses and their job offering?
So, Dario, I think what you're talking about, just to clarify quickly, you mean that they offer some training sort of courses that they can do, and then they're offering kind of an internship or a job afterward. Is this what you mean?
Yep.
Okay. So, I think that the schools, we're probably when we get into question 3 about post COVID-19 considerations, I think that the schools are onto this and understand what's happening because what Google's trying to do and a lot of companies are trying to find the relevancy within our programs to the business community, basically, at the end of the day. And what we have to look at as well is the relevancy to our learner and to the students in particular. There's always a little bit of a push-pull with respect to that, right? So as a teacher, am I teaching only subject matter expertise, how to click the buttons at Google, for example, or vocational Google understanding, maybe Google Analytics or something like that? Or am I also teaching a student, test taking skills, how to work
Hmm.
on a team, how to communicate with others effectively within the business context? The soft skills as well that are sort of inherent in doing a larger program when you're following a cohort.
Yeah.
So I think, however, the schools do have to respond to this competitive pressure. And so I think the answer to that, my own thoughts, are that what we're trying to look towards is micro credentialing.
Hmm.
So take a program, say you have 12 courses in a post grad, and why don't we have these 4 that are particular to Google potential employees or something of that nature.
Right.
The other thing that we're seeing there, Dario, as well, is that at the end of the day, we've actually seen McDonald's, for example, engage with the college community throughout Ontario. And there was a system that was created prior to COVID that really didn't sort of take off in the downtown core and the downtown schools,
Hmm.
Humber College, the other schools that are in Toronto. However, the schools outside of the major cities actually picked up on this, and it was just a plan that went through Fanshawe College. And what they did was they said, if someone has taken a very, very good first year track of McDonald's executive education, so they were trained over at McDonald's, which is everybody that works at McDonald's, right? If they did that, they would be able to shave off their first year of college and go directly into second
Oh,
year. So
interesting.
those kinds of articulation agreements
Right.
also are probably in our future as well. It really had a slow start to go in that direction. However,
Yeah.
and certainly George Brown College didn't need to market like that. So we didn't really need to bring in those students in the second term because we're full. But if you're a college way up north in Thunder Bay or up in Barrie or something like that, maybe you have more needs in that area as well. So
Yeah.
micro-credentialing, I think, is the answer there. We do understand the competitive strategy.
So that's where, Tom, it's interesting. I agree with everything you said, but to build on top of that, there are certain certifications and other things that companies like Google, Amazon, and push people towards, right? So if you are considering becoming a software developer, then you could leverage their courses. So Andy and I, for example, were talking about the Python courses that Google
Mhm.
has developed videos of, along with some exercises, and put them up there. And they actually encourage people who are fresh out of school considering applying for a job at Google. They encourage you to go and take a look at that, because that's in line with how they do business, right? It's kind of an indication to a trained eye of this is how Google operates internally. These are the
Well,
type of questions we ask.
and we do partner with these organizations. Andy can tell you as well that we have strong connections. I don't want to say partnerships. I want to say connections with SAS Canada, for example, for our analytics program. SAS just really understood our needs as educators. They understood that I don't have any money to spend on their software solution or whatnot to train people. They also clearly understood that by training people to their software solutions, Enterprise Miner, Enterprise Guide,
Hmm.
and other SaaS software like base SaaS programming, that essentially these people would go out into the workforce and probably be able to sort of tune their products and everything as well. Lots of companies want to do that. IBM has been knocking at my door for the
Right.
longest time, and they're the ones that are the Python DB2, Watson, and all that kind of stuff as well. We're pretty agnostic. We will go with
Yeah,
whatever company and organization actually understands our process. But some companies out there don't understand what's going on with this kind of thing. And so, for example, when I had deliberations with Salesforce, I really wanted to bring technology like Radian 6 onto campus so
hmm,
that we could do social media listening in the marketing programs. And Salesforce really tried to keep going over, like way over my head into the senior management so that they could sell their product to the entire George Brown College so we would all use it. Well, that's fine and dandy, but that's outside of what I was trying to actually accomplish in the classroom in particular. So I have to find corporations, companies, and organizations that will sort of get into that sandbox with me. And then,
absolutely.
quite frankly, there's a lot of outsourcing that I can do. And then
Hmm.
we are actually making those partnerships. So, so Dario, for sure. I mean, I absolutely would love to talk to people at Google if they're more than interested in bringing their solutions to my students and helping us out with the technology and the software and everything that we need, with also the proviso and understanding that we don't have money to spend on that, but
Hmm.
we can lead people. For example, every year we run a safe roads competition with our analytics students in conjunction with SAS Canada and the Toronto Police Services. And we put a whole bunch of students into that. And of course, SAS then has them as an audience as well. So those types of partnerships are absolutely critical, especially in the top end of education in the postgraduate programs. And
Right.
every school has it in them now that they are integrating work integrated learning solutions to every single program. So that's a key consideration as we move forward as well.
Right. So switching gears a little bit, Kayla says how to encourage international students to pursue learning abroad after pandemic. So one thing that I will say to Kayla, like I was talking to one of my aunts yesterday, and a lot of the focus goes on, the tech and the MBA and these big name type programs. But there are some niche degrees in the market as well. So my aunt, she has a niece who's going to Italy to study fashion. And I asked her the same question. So, how is she going to January? It's like still the middle of COVID, right? Like we're inching closer to December. We don't know how it will be in January. And your bags are packed to go. So, you're going to send your child, the 18, 19-year-old, to go study over there. How does that feel? And she said, look, it's not even a question. Yes, this thing will work itself out because you have to be safe, and every place has regulations and guidelines, and the student themselves has to have certain level of maturity to be able
Mm,
to deal with things like that. But one thing is that people don't want to compromise on the type of education you're going to get, right? So if you can afford it. So this person's going to go and study fashion in Italy, and their choices were they could either go to New York or they could go to Italy. Those are the two top places to go for fashion. I don't know anything about it, but that's what I've been told. So they chose Italy because they felt that European mindset is a little different from the New York, the American mindset, and that's what they wanted to embrace. So to them, it's pandemic hasn't affected this individual's plans at all, except to accelerate that because this person was laid off from their job earlier in the year. So it actually allowed them to think about what they want to do next. Because they wanted to do this for the longest time, but it's what we call golden handcuffs, right?
And Kelia, if I can sort of ride on that as well and tell you institutionally, we're clearly aware of this situation as well. And plans actually were being put into place for a number of different colleges, including ours, before the COVID situation, where we understand that international students are looking for specific accreditation.
Hmm.
So, this is coming out of the United States. Obviously, accreditation generally does. They have that system where, they rank the schools one to 10. You got your top 10, your big 10 schools, and that kind of stuff. Here in Canada, we approach things a little bit differently in such that, and international students should be aware that when we set things like program level outcomes for a program, let's say an accounting program, the accounting program level outcomes are set for the entire province. So
Hmm.
the entire province of Ontario, it doesn't matter which school you go to, if you take that particular accounting degree or diploma, it's equivalent to every other school. But we
Right.
also recognize that international students are unaware of the differences in the Canadian education system and the American one. And so they are seeking accreditation. So we are too. And so it's not certification, but it is a level of accreditation. We've actually had some people fly up from Kansas, Florida. I think we had somebody from Tennessee, so we're going through the entire process to ensure that we have international accreditation, so
Right.
that this is sort of giving the international students a lot more faith in our school systems and everything. But I will say, I believe that the Canadian school system and on the whole has a very, very good brand around the world. I'm pretty sure that people really do want to come here. And I'll tell you anecdotally, a lot of people send me messages all the time. Every week, I'm answering tons and tons of messages from international students that still do
Hmm.
want to study here. There are questions, the questions that I'm grappling with that are a little bit more difficult are the people that are here and they have their PR, so their permanent residency. They are an immigrant, but they have their permanent residency, so they're treated equally to a Canadian citizen, but their credentialing is abroad.
Right.
So, they went to school in India or something like that. And so that's really kind of a gap that we're trying to close that loop a little bit more, because they then need to get international accreditation for
Hmm.
their skills. They have to get it accredited through a service. But accreditation is the answer to that. And we've been on that process, for about 2 years. It takes a good 3 or 4 years to go through this accreditation process. And then it's like every couple of years, they come in and they ratify and make sure that we still meet the standards overall. Hopefully that answers
Absolutely.
too.
Yeah, and Dalal says thank you so much. I'm assuming that he's really enjoying the information that we're sharing so far.
Or he's
So
leaving.
one of the two. I'm gonna assume the better one, Tom.
Please do drop your questions in, because they're
Yeah.
more interesting to answer than anything
Yeah,
else.
absolutely. So one of the other things we did, I'm not sure how many people are familiar with OECD, but it's part of arm's length to UN organization that does a lot of studies and data collection among their partner companies, or not companies, sorry, countries. So I would encourage you to go to their website and take a look. There's tons of data out there. In fact, they've been talking about publishing a study that shows the future of education and what that means. So one thing that I'm curious about is, are they going to cover it more from a younger student's perspective? Because that's a very different conversation, right, Tom, from a postgraduate and international student. You wouldn't expect a 5-year-old to fly anywhere in the world for education,
Well,
but
I
being
also think that that plays into what I believe Dario mentioned earlier, which is,
right,
that relevancy between, say, the business stakeholders. So what does Google want the
right,
students to know versus the relevancy to the learner? What does the student want to
right,
study? Right. And so we do get oversubscribed sometimes in programs where, we're all thinking, all the faculty are thinking, how are we going to find jobs for these people at the end of their program? Like, how are we going to help them into a job when there's so many people that are taking, say, this HR program or something? and there might not be so many jobs in that area, versus, we need more people taking things like programming because there's lots of jobs, but they're not choosing it. So there's relevancy to the learner as well as relevancy to the business situation out there as well. And
Right.
where should I care? What should I care as faculty? Do I care about my student satisfaction at the end of the day, or do I care about my employer satisfaction, that they're satisfied with the student skill sets? I've kind of always landed on the employer satisfaction. That's personal, but certainly we cannot neglect student satisfaction as well. And that actually is how we're measured, at least in the college system. We're measured through student satisfaction at the end of the course.
Right.
So
So
they
that's
want Big
actually
Macs, we give them Big Macs, right?
you're right. Very interesting.
It happens. So that's why tenure and that type of thing is still really critical and important, even though it's kind of going away in a lot of
Right.
situations. It's really still critically important because then, we're not going to be giving Big Macs all the time just in order to satisfy the student and make sure that the customer is satisfied. Because at the end of the day, everything will lower there, and then Google's not getting the employees that they need. Clicking the right buttons because those weren't the buttons that the students wanted to click, right?
It's very true. So I know we talked about vocational education a while ago. You had mentioned that it's not just the data and the analytics program, but there could be carpentry and all those other type of vocational, more hands-on plumbing, cabinet making, which a friend of mine took that course a while ago as well. So how are those programs specifically impacted by lockdown? Because there are certain things that we're able to do online for data and some of the other things, but there are certain things for vocational, as you said, the labs and being impacted by cases and how that's developing. Just can't do certain things. So actually, Kayla asked a really interesting question around that. How do you think vocational students still are perceived bias in workforce in some countries? How to strengthen their holistic knowledge as quality students? A really good question, Tom.
It is a very good question. And I think, honestly, Kalia, I think the answer to that, I'm just going to speculate, but my understanding is that I think that what we're seeing is a blending of skill sets across the board in all areas. So even if I'm talking about a white collar worker or somebody that is in an analytics realm, they still need more skill sets than just simply being like almost like a bean counter, or a programmer. They actually need to have the creative aspects as well, that a data analyst or somebody in data science needs to be able to explain complex statistical information in easy to understand ways, so that they're not sitting there talking to you about R squared factor and what that means, but instead they're talking about the validity or reliability of the data. And so we're seeing a cross tabulation of these skill sets that are required. And that's why I talked a little bit about the soft skills at the beginning.
Hmm.
In vocational specific programs, skills programs, apprentice programs like plumbing and that kind of thing, there is a blending of these skills as well. So you have to think of your today's carpenter as being someone that also needs to have the skills of becoming an entrepreneur. So, how do we bridge that gap and not
Right.
have siloed schools anymore, whereby you're taking construction technologies and learning how to hammer and nail, I'm taking an entrepreneurship program over here. And the question is always in my mind as an educator: if I'm educating somebody, am I educating them about the theory of this idea of entrepreneurship? Or am I actually helping them to develop an actual business plan that they're going out the door with a business? Various stakeholders, teachers, etc., will give you separate answers for that. And I think that's probably a good thing, that we have diversity of thought
Hmm.
in those areas. That's my thinking.
Absolutely. And just down the chain, continuing that trend, I would anticipate that there could be a skill shortage where we are not able to address those gaps in near future because you don't see the impact right away. So if there are, for example, construction industry has been on the rise, at least in Canada, right? It's been very supported by the government and pushing that envelope further to make sure that those people can stay employed instead of being unemployed at home. But at the
Yes.
same time, if the schools can't churn out people with those skills, then what happens next, right? So, an year from now, 2 years from now, we need to
And
find
I,
ways to solve those problems.
and I also agree with what people are saying in the chat there. Sayal and Dario, you guys are, sorry, Dario is really talking about a little bit with respect to data analysis and data analytics being sort of all the rage right now. I'm starting to see it turn a corner a little bit, but with my data analysis students, I'm trying to tell them, we need to get past this whole idea or thought process that, I need to know this tick mark box of skills.
Right.
I need Python, I need R, I need this and this and whatever. At the end of the day, what you need is the floor, the ability to pick up those skills relatively quickly. And that's the type of thing that we would learn in our former, liberal arts type education, where we were learning how to learn, not just where to click the buttons. There's one course that we run, well, a couple of courses actually that we run that are in the vocational computing sphere. And sometimes I have a difficult time getting faculty to see that, outsourcing some of the tasks that they are doing, for example, in Excel, and outsourcing those tasks to the tools that are online that the students can actually go and just sort of click buttons and everything like this, is a task-oriented learning that is missing the context. So for example, those of you that understand databases, I might show the students, or the students might see in the software where to click a relationships button in a relational database like Microsoft Access. They have no idea what relationships are. The context isn't there. And so a lot of these, Skillshares, Udemy, these types of courses or whatnot that you take, where it's literally a checkbox of the different tools that you're learning, are missing the context, and they're missing those creative pieces that employers really, really value. They value your ability to work on a team. They value your ability to communicate. Those are the two top skills that you need,
Right.
in the business world. And also, I'm going to suggest you need the skill of influence. Everybody needs to understand influence and perception. And, that really is transformational for everybody, I think.
Absolutely. I would actually add to that also listening skills, right? Active listening, because if you can
Yes.
understand the problem that the business is trying to solve, which is what I have to do often as a consultant, right? In the initial conversation, the client might say, I'm looking for X, Y, and Z. But when you go in, that X, Y, and Z is actually a symptom of a deeper problem.
Yes.
And you can't just solve X, Y, and Z. It'll keep on appearing again and again.
Yeah,
It's
so
very
Dario's
interesting.
got it too in the chat room as well. He's really seeing what I'm saying, because lots of discussions with computer faculty to say, listen, what are the outcomes of this course? I mean, are the course level outcomes being set specifically to, the student can click this button, student can put
Right.
information in this cell or on Excel, or is it that they're developing some sort of a visualized solution, and communicating that in some way or another, even though this is a computing course, right? So, and that's been my own personal transformations over the years as well, to really understanding that this is the type of thing that we need to help to develop in young people also. And I hope that these are the
Absolutely.
transformations that will continue. Blending theory and practice. Yes, purpose is the key. Absolutely. I think we're all on the same page with that.
Yeah, which takes us to the next thing, right? So we're all kind of talking about what's working for vocational stuff, what's working for data science type of programs, tools versus theory versus practice. So what is the best way to learn based on based on the experience of people that we have on the call today? So Tom, you had put this question together and you
Mhm.
had identified some options.
I'm
So let's
curious what
do
people
another
are
voting.
thinking. Yeah.
Yeah. So we're seeing Kayla says number three, which is hybrid.
Keely,
Metin
have
thinks
you had
one.
experience in the hybrid model? Have you had experience as a student?
Me?
Hmm. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, actually, I'm currently the doctoral education doctoral student in University of Southern California. That is hybrid format, and I can make very efficiency to focus the online learning, especially in the pandemic. And I gain a lot of information and knowledge, such as this meeting. And I also tend to the in person and communicate, interactive and communicate with the actual person.
Right. Do you feel that that's partly maybe your learning style, that your learning style is more of a listening learning style, so that going to class and, paying attention to the teacher or whatever helps you out?
Yes, especially for the in-person learning, and we can give the feedback immediately and interactive with others and gain the knowledge during the procedures.
Yes, absolutely. I think Gunjan actually is putting on there as well, like, did your answer change depending on the actual stakeholder? So if we're talking about college education, adult education, or if we're talking about, say, an
Right.
elementary school teacher, what
And
about?
that was actually, Tom, building upon what you said, because learning style to me changes as you grow up, right? So, and I definitely noticed this. I was a horrible student when I was young because I just hated memorizing things, right? But I needed to understand at a deeper level what the concepts were and how they applied to real life, right? So based on that, I became a much better student later in life. And as you know, we just heard, when you're a doctorate student, it's exactly that type of learning style. You need to be kind of in person, but at the same time, that hybrid model can help you get there faster.
I have an interesting anecdote, actually. I find, because usually we do the in-person classes. My analytics program initially about 3 years ago was actually built to be fully online. So we actually built it out to be online so that we could sort of have an expanded, presence. Obviously, with the global world, we wanted to have the ability to train people that were not only on our George Brown College campus in downtown Toronto. And and then we pulled that back into a hybrid learning model because international students wanted to come to Canada, and we were not able to issue a visa for international students to come to Canada if we didn't have 60% on, I think, or 60% on campus work. So we had to move to the hybrid model. So anecdotally, I have to say, in the hybrid model, students have a lot more opportunities to voice their concerns.
Hmm.
I find in this online model, people are very worried about giving feedback and voicing their concerns. They're also worried about getting the right answers because
Yeah.
it's being recorded and this kind of thing as well. So people are being very cautious about these
But
kinds of.
Tom, do you think that has anything to do with class sizes? Because I was talking to Andy, and Andy, feel free to jump in. You and I were talking about this yesterday, and some of the classes where you have, maybe double digit students, it's harder for everyone to speak up.
I don't know. Andy, do you have your mic there?
Yeah, yeah, good. Yeah, so I think it also depends on the number of students that you have in an online course. Ideally, you're not supposed to have more than, I think, 50 or 60 students, because you want to create a conducive environment whereby you can engage your students. They'll feel comfortable asking questions as well as answering questions. So if you have a big class, that means some of the students might even be hiding, or you might have some students who just sign up online and then they'll just mute themselves. You might be thinking that they are online, but they're doing something else. But when you have a smaller class, like 20 students, you can engage them, and you can even let them turn on their video, their cameras, where you can see them. But for 60 students, it also puts a lot of pressure on the system that you are using. So you might want to tell them to turn off their videos or their microphones, which doesn't promote conducive learning environment. So I think, yeah, having a smaller class is very effective as compared to like 60 students or let's say 70
Mhm.
students. And yeah.
I love how you can go beyond the walls of a classroom when it comes to the online situation, though. You can bring in other websites and everything, and everyone can kind of interact all at once. I love those pieces too. But I agree with you. As Dario says, 40 plus is really hard to manage. I know
Mhm.
I've got 60 in my classes right now. And, I mean, what can you do? I mean, you can't really manage people to turn their cameras on or off, or even ask them to do that. So the majority of my students leave their cameras off, and I don't get that feedback anymore as the
Right.
teacher. So I'm not seeing their faces to see whether or not they're resonating with the information that is being delivered to.
Mhm.
So there has to be more of an explicit feedback channel, where
So
I'm
that
asking.
that's an interesting point, Tom. So how about the actual format of classes? So I think in George Brown specifically, each class is a continuous 3 hours, correct?
I have one right now that I'm delivering that's 2 hour, 2 and 2. So 2 hours
Okay.
and 2 hour tutorial afterwards. So
So
we
how
can't.
about the actual format? Like how do you run the straight 3 hours versus the 2-2?
Me personally, I make sure that I do have a lesson And I do a synchronous lesson, and I absolutely record it because some people can't make it to the synchronous lesson, or, some people can't listen to for 3 hours to this kind of a chat, or Zoom's tiring and that kind of thing. I personally do 2 breaks in there, about 10, 15 minutes each. So at the hour points, I usually do that as well. It's exactly like we're doing here. I'm sharing things. I'm making sure that I have things like multiple choice questions there for engagement for the students as much as possible. And honestly, I find that I'm just not hounding the people that are not engaging. I find that there's some people that do want to sit back just like they would in the classroom. They don't really want to engage very much. They're just there to watch. I don't really pressure them. Andy, I'm not sure if you do. What do you do about this?
Yes, I don't pressure them. Because it's not face to face, then it's online. So you might not know what the students might be doing, or sometimes the student might not be available. Although they are online, they might not be available. So let's say when you call students and they don't respond, kind of, creates like negative feelings among other students. So I don't do that, as you mentioned. But one way that I engage my students is to let them work in groups. We use Blackboard Collaborate, and it's very very, very helpful. So we're able to group students, and then let's say a group of, let's say 5 or 6. I will encourage each and everyone to turn on their cameras because it's not like a big class, right? And then I'll jump from one group to another group for discussion. And then after maybe 20, 30 minutes, we convey to the main room, and then we end the class. So it's how the instructor or the professor uses technology in his or her classroom to engage students. That's my opinion. Yeah.
And
100%.
Dario agrees with you. He says that I encounter mental health issues influence interaction. So that could be something else, Andy, the assumption that we make versus what the student may be going through and why they're not responding.
Correct.
So that was going to be my follow-up as well, Andy. So thank you for bringing that up as well. I think teams, I think groups, grouping them off and having them work in peer groups is critical. So I think you have to do that in this online situation. Most of the students I find, I'll set up a Collaborate or a Zoom call or something like that. Most of them will get on there and say, hey, let's just talk on WhatsApp or something. So it's out of my view. But I think that they need to have lots of experiences where they are sort of communicating with each other. And I have a question for the teachers that are in here, because I actually was discussing this with another teacher the other day. Because the students get into their WhatsApp groups, one teacher actually told me that he jumps into the WhatsApp groups as well with the students. Would you do that? I'm curious. I'm curious if other teachers in here, if you would jump in on the WhatsApp group with your students.
Do you want to come in, Tom? Yeah, so I think it depends on the professor or the instructor. Personally, I'll not do that because that is beyond our institutional, let's say, platform that we are required to use with students. So if a communication happens on the WhatsApp platform, this platform is not approved by the institution. Okay, the right communication channel is through emails, or let's say Blackboard, or let's say Microsoft Teams, or technologies that have been approved. So communicating with students on a different platform, while to me it's not the right communication channel, so I'll not do that. And students should also have their privacy. Right?
Yeah, and to add to that, right, that sets the wrong expectations maybe. What if the student now starts messaging you on WhatsApp at odd hours of night?
I don't really want to know. I don't want to know what they're saying about me, to be honest with you. They could have a conversation and everything. And so Dario obviously is there. He wouldn't be able to control the setting. He would, but that may be like me sitting with them in the cafe. Exactly. It's like when teachers have come to me and said, I want to use Facebook to run my class. And I'm going, what? Facebook is actually like going to the bar. I mean, do you go to the bar and run your class there? Because this doesn't make any sense. The right platform for the right area. And Dario, I did want to acknowledge what you were talking about as well, which was that some students have had some mental health concerns and issues
Mhm.
as well. And so in that case, I don't know about you, but I've found that I've had to have quite a few individual meetings of support. So, we're not counselors, and so we don't want to be derailing whatever counseling that they receive, but at the same time, being in the role that we're in here as well, we have to, be somebody that's going to kind of be a pillar there to support our
Right.
students and guide them to the right areas, whether it's accessibility, supports, or their student association or whatever, to get that mental health support concern as well. And I think this has been a growing thing as well within education. And I think it's something we really do need to deal with in the COVID-19
Mhm.
transformations afterward. So
So
trying
a
to say,
couple more comments. I know I went to the earlier slide, Tom, because we were talking about the changing role of the educator there, right? The coaching versus the material piece.
yeah,
But before we do that, Kelia says online learning is absolutely efficient way, but it cannot be instead of offline as interactive and social ability enhancement, right? So that goes hand in hand with the comments from Dario and from you and Andy about that mental health and how to ensure that people are not just like with this increasing screen time, just feeling bombarded with stimulus and no way to actually process it properly.
yeah. And also, I think they have a difficult time navigating that. I mean,
Right.
the truth of the matter is you're sitting at home. There's not that peer pressure to not open up your Facebook or not go into your social media, not to dive into your Instagram or turn your TV on or, do the other things. Your kids see you're there. They come and the cat walks
Mm-hmm.
in front of you and things like that as well. So, on top of it, you've got all those extra pressures and you don't have the internal classroom management pressure, which is pressure to pay attention, right? And
Right.
pressure to be prepared to answer a question. If I use the Socrates method and point you out and ask you, specifically, I want you to answer this question. So they don't have
Right.
that pressure as much. They still need the teacher, to guide them to what is proper behavior. You
Mm-hmm.
guys would be really surprised sometimes. As I mentioned at the very beginning of this discussion, my Enactus team is a whole bunch of social enterprise students that sort of practice and showcase, the types of things that we teach them, and it's in the real world setting. And even then, I have to go in and model behavior of a business person so that my students will understand exactly what to do when they're, say, running a meeting or something. And I literally go in and sit down and hijack their first meeting. And the first thing I do is ask them, does anybody need to actually check their phone?
Mm-hmm.
And you watch them all in the room go crazy and checking their phone. And I said, does anyone need to go to the washroom? Boom. Bunch of them run off, go to the washroom, come back again. But I have to set that stage, put down an agenda, and grab a student and say, you're going to be timing me to that agenda, and then actually model that behavior for the students. Otherwise, they're really not sure what to do. And I think in the online environment, we're having a very difficult time sort of imparting all of those sort of business norms and things like that in as well. Sorry,
Yeah.
Gunjan, you're getting to this slide here.
No, actually, Andy just mentioned he has something to add. So I want to hear, Andy, what you have to say for the mental health piece as well.
Yeah, so I just want to add something to what Tom mentioned about the mental health. I think as faculty members, educators, we should also capitalize on the resources that we have within our institution. I remember last semester in one of our courses, we invited a mental health specialist or experts who came and talked to some of our students on how to stay mentally healthy, especially during COVID-19 times. And it was very, very helpful, very, very helpful. So there are a lot of resources available that you can use to help your students. So it's not just about um, focusing only on, let's say, the outcomes of your course or your program, but you need to think of promoting students' well-being, right? So it's also very, very important. And I'll say at the end of the workshop, I had a lot of emails from the students saying, thank you, Andy, thank you, Tom, for bringing this guy in. And they really appreciated the fact that we were able to
Mm-hmm.
organize such events. So yeah.
And you know what?
Right.
It's interesting, right, Andy? Because what are companies going to do when they are faced with this in their employees now, right? And we're seeing in education where students have these mental health concerns, as Dario was mentioning, and we have the infrastructure to assist and support those students because of the culture of what we are. But what about businesses? I mean, what about you work for Home Depot? I mean,
Mhm.
my friend works for Home Depot. She's in facilities management. They're figuring out how to bring back employees at 25 per month or something like that. And so, these people all have their mental health concerns. So, maybe maybe businesses can be looking to the educational institutions to see what we're doing in supporting people with their mental health challenges, because we certainly have had an uptick of that within the higher ed system.
Yeah, and Dario says it's also rampant at corporate. He's seen a few at TD and Scotia, so very Canadian examples from banking industry there for sure.
Yes, I bet. I bet.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And Dario, I just want to touch upon while we're on this subject, you were asking about creating communities for those conversations. So I just want to clarify if you meant more the communities like discussions type of forums versus the online forums, because I could tell you personally, even as a consultant, I'm all over the platforms, right? Using Zoom, WebEx, Teams, Slack, whatever it is. And I used to love Slack before the pandemic. I've learned to hate it because it's feeling like such a work. I'm on LinkedIn anyway, so that's something I can work with because it's a social media plus a chat slash community forum, right? But Slack, there were certain communities that I was a part of that once a week you would join a call, but then other times during the week, people would be posting interesting articles and all that. How many communities can you actually be a part of as one single human being? There's a cap to that. And that's what I recently realized about myself. Because at the back of my mind, as I'm going to bed each night, I'm thinking, oh, you know what, that one community I haven't checked in on in a while. So it's now become less about me learning new things and interacting with those people and more about the peer pressure of showing your face there, which isn't really the right thing during COVID, in my opinion, either. So I wonder if some of the students are seeing that as well. If each professor has a different platform they're using, then what happens to that student, right?
It's also hopeless as well because
Yeah.
I have a couple of communities for the faculty and they don't engage. So, yeah, I mean,
Wow.
right? I mean,
Everybody's
it's
got
on
their
MS
challenges.
Teams and, I've got the groups in there and I'm the only one saying anything. So, I mean, at the end of the day, even the faculty are sort of their free agents as well, at least within George Brown College. Maybe the other colleges work a little differently, but we're a bit of a free agent model, which I think is really great for the student, but can be a bit of a nightmare for organization
Hmm.
advantage.
Absolutely. So I think we've already actually had, Tom, really good discussion on this slide. In the interest of time, we're actually almost at one, and I'm now wondering we need almost another session to finish this conversation off